And we are live. Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock cost optimization at AWS. My name is Alex. I am filling in as the lead for Steph today, and I lead the optimization team for our strategic industries at AWS. And this is my guest, Cameron. And he and I have worked together a long, long time ago and stayed very close friends. So I'm really excited that he was able to jump in. Cameron, do you want to give a little bit of background to yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Cameron Stokes. I have been on the technical engineering side for a long time, and then in previous jobs or most recent jobs, switched over to the sales and solutions engineering side. But I did about 10 years of software development a long, long time ago before switching over to more of the cloud side of things. Then I worked at the weather company with Alex, helping move them to Amazon over a period of time. And then after that, moved on to a couple of Amazon partners on the infrastructure as code side of things. So I worked at HashiCorp for a number of years, and most recently at Pulumi, which is a similar infrastructure as code offering.
Awesome. And Cameron was actually the first person to introduce me to AWS. I think if you've been listening to this show, you've heard me talk about when I worked at the Weather Channel and I printed out the what was at the time the DBR, but now the cost and usage report, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and Cameron helped me make it English, and we actually made in like a hacked up version in Google Sheets of a calculator to calculate our cost and as we were growing at the Weather Channel. So he is going to know a lot more than me when it comes to this stuff because he is the person who taught me. But today, what we wanted to talk about is automating optimization. So it's always the first thing a customer will ask, right? We can tell them all these different things to change to save money in their environment, but then they go and fix it. And then in a month, they have to do it again, right? So, what are the different ways that we can automate that and make it kind of foolproof in that way? So, Cameron, I'm going to pivot to you of when you think of automating optimization, what is some of like the first things that come to your mind?
Yeah. The one of the great things about Amazon and kind of where AWS and one of the things that they really pioneered for application developers is everything has an API. Everything is API driven or can be API driven, and so that means you can programmatically do anything effectively on AWS and on the cloud. And so there's tools like Pulumi, there's tools like HashiCorp Terraform, and then of course like CDK and CloudFormation that allow you to automate provisioning and setup and management of your resources on AWS. That's real basic things like create an instance, create a bucket, create a network, etc. But in terms of optimization, what you can do is then also automate tagging, automate how certain things and aspects of your resources are set up so that they are optimized. And so tagging is kind of a basic one. It's kind of a complicated one because then those tags can then roll into your cost usage reports and so on. So that's kind of the first thing to get right is tagging all of your resources so that they're categorized cost wise. But then again, you can using APIs or using tools like GDK and Pulumi and such. You can then again automate and enforce how those resources are used so that they're optimized.
And something that I've seen people use that as well is like say that you want to make sure that you're not using original generation EC2
Yeah.
and kind of mandating pushing that forward. So that works when you're creating new resources. Is there a way to use that same kind of methodology to change existing resources if you wanted to like say change to GP3 from GP2?
Yeah, so again, the tools like CloudFormation, like Pulumi and such, are really designed to be used like from the very beginning. So as long as something has been provisioned using CloudFormation or Pulumi and such, you can then put policies in place to kind of hint or warn your developers, your engineers that they are not being used in the optimal way. And so that could be exactly what you said. If they're still on an M1, it could print a warning in your automation to say, hey, consider upgrading this. You'll save money. It'll be a better machine anyway and such. For tools like that, it's if those are in place kind of from the start for your project, then it's really easy to implement policies and such like that. After the fact, if you don't have a tool like that in place, again, the APIs that Amazon gives you allow you to kind of discover those things, discover those non-optimal configurations, and then again create reports or create you know you can send an email to say, hey, so and so developer, you might consider making this change.
Do you err on the side of warning versus saying shut down?
Yeah, so that's one of the big things that I actually kind of promoted while I was at Pulumi, is you can have, at least with Pulumi policy, and I'm sure that other tools can do it as well, you can have warnings versus restrictions effectively. So that warning you can put in place for your policies and your developers today to say, hey, these are the changes you should make, and you should make them over the course of the next 6 months. So you actually give your team time to adapt and make the changes. Just switching an instance from M1 to C3 or whatever the case might be can be impactful. The machine has to restart. It might actually impact your application and such. So it's not just something that's just the click of a button and you don't have to give it any thought. It's a bit more involved than that. So if you can actually put a policy in place, put something in place to give your teams time to adapt, then it actually is less impactful to their day-to-day, and they're able to make that change over time. And then after that 6 months or whatever the time period is, that's when you can actually change that to be like an actual restriction where they can't create new resources that are not optimized. They can't go into a new region without doing it right the first time, things like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. I remember in our Weather Channel days, we had to be careful because if we mandated certain things and a storm hit and we were spinning up a bunch of resources,
Yeah.
we couldn't. We were in error zone. So we had to be very careful around that, to say the least. Also,
Yeah.
you want to, one thing that Cameron's always helped me understand, because I don't come from a technical background, is you want all sides of the organization to be on the same page, right? You don't want to just mandate something that maybe the leadership level or management wants or finance wants that engineering doesn't understand or know how it helps them. And I think that's a tricky thing to get around. I know when we worked together, we were trying to implement some scheduling of
Mm-hmm.
instances, and people definitely fought us on that. What is what is your opinion when it comes to scheduling instances on and off and the best practices around that?
Yeah, that's another one that's again a little hard to implement in the sense that it is impactful, right? Like one of the common scenarios that has been talked about for a long time, I think, is in your non-production environments, in your development, your staging, your test environments and such. You probably don't need those running all the time, consuming instances, spending money on things that aren't used all the time. So shut them down on the evenings, shut them down on the weekend and such. But again, that's easier said than done in a lot of cases because applications need setup. They kind of have several steps to get up and running in most cases. So yeah, if you're able to write the automation, use Amazon's APIs to kind of find things that are non-production and then shut them down or turn them off at night. It's a great way to save money. But that's like you said, Alex, you've got to actually plan for that. You've got to get buy-in from that from your teams and work with those teams so that you can do it effectively and not cause them more work in the end. If they come to work on Monday and everything's turned off, they've got to spend time getting things set back up so they can actually do their job. That's going to be more impactful and actually waste more money, more of the company's money and people time as opposed to the money spent on the actual resources at AWS.
Yeah, yeah. You want to have people on your side and people on your page. I also think that that's why I always go back to cost visibility, because it's one thing to give the CFO and the CIO cost visibility, but when the people whose hands are on the keyboards understand what their cost and usage is and where those are coming from, it helps it helps make those changes a lot more. So when when talking about automating optimization, we've talked about some of the key things, and some of those might not be, like tagging's not going to save you money right off the bat, but it's going to give you that granularity to make the changes. So what are some ways that are kind of a reach, right? Maybe not as easy as just kind of implementing, a change, or saying that you're not going to use M1s, but something that you've seen customers do or people be successful at that's a little bit harder to implement, but is a way to save and get those savings.
Yeah, I think so. Amazon's AWS's IAM service has come a long way since its kind of origin of just allowing kind of simple or allowing or prohibiting simple service calls and such. So, historically, you could say via an IAM policy that this user or this group can run an instance, can terminate an instance, can create a VPC and such. But in recent years, the kind of granularity of permissions has gotten much more sophisticated with IAM, and that you can actually put um, like service control policies and other kind of criteria and conditions into those IAM policies. So you can actually have an IAM policy that says this group or this user can run an instance, but it must be of this instance class or this instance type. You can create a VPC or create a bucket, but it must be in this region. And so you can get really sophisticated with your IAM policies that you as the cloud owner in your company or in your organization set up and provide to your team, so that you're restricting what they can do, and you're kind of enforcing and ensuring that optimization from the start. Those IAM policies get real big, get real complicated. There's thousands of API calls that Amazon has, so you have to be very targeted in the calls and the operations and such that you're wanting to enforce and wanting to restrict. But again, as long as you kind of have that, or as long as you can put that in place for your organization, like it basically means people cannot run things that are not optimized, or they're not optimum for your organization or for your workload as well.
Yeah. Who do you think should set that precedence, though? Right? Because you want to give people the freedom to make some of those decisions, but someone has to be the creator of those policies.
Yeah, I mean, every organization, every company is different in terms of how they use the cloud, and how they allow their application engineers and their software developers and such to use the cloud. So it's certainly hard to have one answer for that, of course. But I think one of the trends I've seen recently, is in the past few years, I guess, is the idea of a platform team. So there's a team in an organization that is responsible for the kind of initial cloud account, AWS account provisioning and setup and such. And they're the ones that either work with the security team, work with finance and such, to kind of put those policies in place, so that when a new account is handed over to a team for whatever their workload, whatever their application is, it's kind of set and good to go from the start. That's similar to what we were doing at the Weather Channel. We were effectively the platform team, and we were the ones kind of vending and handing out those Amazon accounts. So if you have that set up, that's a great way to do it, because then from the start that account is ready to go. If you don't, then I think, kind of back to a point you said earlier, is using tags, using kind of getting those cost reports set up as well, and basically making costs visible to the application teams that are the ones using it, gives them ownership and lets them understand what they're doing, and perhaps what they're doing wrong, so that they have a sense of ownership to do it right and to improve. And so if that's the setup, if how a company uses AWS is very distributed out into the teams, and just putting the ownership, giving them the visibility into cost, will, I think, encourage people to put those policies in place, and put best practices in place.
Yep. And encourage and doing it can sometimes be two different things. But
Yeah, sure.
for those of you who are just joining, this is the AWS Keys to Optimization, and our special guest today is Cameron Stokes, who I've worked with for a long time, and he was able to fill in for us last minute. So if you have any questions, we're talking automating optimization, or anything that's worked for you, throw it into the chat and we can share it, and feel free to ask anything. So pivoting a little bit, you've seen a lot of companies kind of go through those growing pains of growing on the cloud. My team works a lot with customers that are pretty established, you know, uh, have been on the cloud for a while and have a pretty big presence on the cloud. So when you are watching these customers or companies grow in their presence in the cloud, and optimization comes up, and how do we save? What are some of those growing pains that you see kind of come up first?
Yeah, I think really always the first one is just visibility into costs, right? Like it's a lot of teams, a lot of developers and such will do their day job, meaning they're just working to push out the next version of their application. They're working to fix things, but like cost is not top of mind. It's not not something that they're thinking about actively. And so I think kind of back to what the point we both said previously is just making cost visible, and letting teams, letting the engineers that are working on their applications know, last week we spent X, and this week we're trending higher, and just having that kind of front of mind, either in a dashboard that everybody's looking at, and an email alert that's going out, setting budget alerts in AWS and such, will make people more mindful of it, and therefore they're going to think about it. The next time they're going to make an actual change to their infrastructure, they're going to think, oh, the last time I did something similar, I blew up our costs and blew up our budget for the month. I should be more thoughtful about it this time. So that's really the first step, is just kind of making everybody aware of what they're spending on the cloud, and understanding the impacts that changes that they make to the infrastructure have on their budget and their spend as well. That's kind of step one, is just getting people aware of spend, and understanding how to getting them to understand how to kind of dive deeper on it as well. Right, it's one thing to know you spent $1,000 last month, but it's another to know that went to S3 storage, that went to network transfer, that went to an EKS cluster that went unused because somebody forgot about it after doing a test, things like that.
So on to the email notification, because we all are victim of just filtering emails and not looking at them.
Sure.
And one thing that you and I have talked about in the past is, like, how do you bring in some of this to things like Slack, right?
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen companies do when it comes to some of that? Like, have you seen that combination of maybe Slack alerts and like that automation? And what have you seen around that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, one of the great things about AWS is everything has an API. Everything can effectively be automated. So um, at Pulumi, one of the things that I really promoted again with our customers is, as a part of that platform team, again, you're setting up accounts, you're kind of handing them out to the different teams in your company. Set up budget alerts from the start as well, right? If it's a production account, it's probably going to spend more than a non-production account, perhaps. So you can actually, within code, within the code that you're writing for your infrastructure's code application, you can say, if prod, budget alert is $1,000 or whatever an appropriate number is. And if it's non-production, if it's test, if it's staging and such, set a budget alert of $200, whatever the appropriate number might be is. And you can actually set thresholds as well, right? Like once you get to 20% of that budget, send an email. Once you get to 50%, send it to Slack, et cetera. So all of that can be done in code, so that you don't have to click around the console 1,000 times to set it up, and then you can repeat that across all of your accounts that you're handing out to your teams. And so yeah, again, getting it front, top of mind, and in front of people via Slack, via email, whatever is kind of the team's preferred method, is definitely the right way to again make it visible, make it present for people. And again, via automation, you can get really sophisticated with your thresholds, with where those alerts go to, and how they're acted upon. It's impressive how much can be done via automation these days. Whereas if you've been in the IT industry for a decade or so, like, we did not have these tools, we did not have any of this visibility, 10 years ago.
We were chasing people around. That was a good thing we were in an office, right?
It's true.
So we have a good question from the chat. So what tools, resources do you use to identify workloads or resources that would benefit from automation? And what kind of metrics would you look at to see if it's working?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely it's complicated. I'll say, right. It's not one click. It's not a simple script to kind of do all this. So you do actually really have to invest time in this. You have to have someone that can write some code to do this automation, and actually have enough time in their day and their day job, whatever, to actually spend on this. So it's not easy. It is getting easier as the tooling and as the APIs and such are getting better. But so yeah, I think to give an example of kind of how you could do it, you can look at you can use again AWS's APIs to query for instances, to query for RDS databases, whatever the case might be, and then look at say their utilization at CloudWatch, right? So if like CPU is at 0% or 1% over an X period of time, either that instance is underutilized and maybe just can be kind of scaled down and right sized down to a smaller instance that costs less money, or perhaps it's a forgotten instance, right? It's a database that someone set up to do a test, and then they went home, and stopped working for the week, and then came back Monday and forgot that they left it there, and it's just going to sit there forever until somebody finds it. And so um, that requires a good bit of scripting, right? To query, to call the describe instances API, to parse that, to then look at CloudWatch metrics and such, to see how it's utilized. But all of that's doable. All of that is scriptable, which is nice. As far as metrics for how you can tell if the automation is working, uh, again, in that scenario, in that example that I just described, if you're looking for instances that can be downsized, can go from a large C5 whatever to a C3 whatever, whatever the case might be. Looking at that utilization change over time is helpful, right? So if again something's sitting at 0% utilized and you downsize it to a smaller instance and now it's at 50% utilized, that's actually a good thing, because you're now seeing that your utilization is more aligned with the size of the resource that you're using. And then of course cost over time too, right? So if you're running this automation across multiple accounts in your organization, you can see that hopefully see that those costs are going down over time as well. And that way, the automation is working too.
You just brought me back to when when I don't remember what project we were working on, but I believe it was an intern that left a giant instance running all weekend that they were messing with, and we figured that out through alerts, I think. But uh, one thing that you and I had looked at in the past is, and if something is running at, I think we used 5% as the threshold, under 5% CPU for over 30 days of automatically tagging it,
Mm-hmm.
because then it gives you that like list of resources. And there are times that, there are some instances that are memory heavy that might not have that much fluctuation, but you can also, I think it's key to look at the trend, right? If something is
Mm-hmm.
staying steady and not adjusting at all, then it's probably not being messed with,
Yeah,
even
yeah,
if it's heavy.
that's a great point about tagging, right? As part of your automation could be basically marking resources that are like pending deletion, right? So let's say you don't want to just automatically delete things, because even if it's underutilized, maybe it is still utilized, and you just need to right size it. So a practice you could do, as you just described, is find all these resources that your automation thinks can be optimized, either deleted or downsized, and tag them as pending delete or pending update, whatever the case might be. And then, a week later, when your script runs again, it sees those are still there and knows, okay, it's been pending delete for a week. Now it's time to take action, or to send an email and alert the team that's using it. That's a great way to kind of garbage collect things over time, is by marking them as pending delete and then deleting them a week later or 30 days later, or whatever the right time frame is.
Yeah, and I think also calculating the percentage of each kind of team's environment that is getting tagged, because then if they're fixing the problem, you can see that that percentage is getting less and
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, this is being fixed good, instead of only saying, hey, here's everything you're doing wrong, right?
Yep.
Because people don't respond very well to that.
Yep.
Uh, but when so with kind of automating the tagging around underutilized when it comes to EC2, what are other things? I mean, I'm guessing kind of brainstorming storage, you could see what hasn't been accessed in a certain amount of time that's maybe sitting in standard, or what are some other resources outside of EC2 that you could be doing this with?
Yeah, storage is certainly a great one, right? S3 has different storage classes now. So if you know that a bucket is used for a certain type of data that is infrequent access, then you can make sure that it's the infrequent access storage class and such. Certainly EBS volumes, right? Storage is relatively expensive on EBS compared to other resource types. So ensuring that you're using the right EBS storage class for your applications is important as well. And something that, again, that I was kind of a proponent of, or at least an idea that I put helped customers understand is, your performance needs for production are often different than testing and staging and such, right? If I'm a software developer, I'm working on my application and it's just me testing something, then I can be on a cheaper EBS storage class for my test than production needs, right? Production might need the fastest EBS storage possible. I don't need that when it's just me doing my tests. So again, via policies with your infrastructure as code solution, or via policies in your IAM policies, you can enforce that production is allowed to use bigger, better, faster, more expensive storage classes, but everything non-production cannot. It must use the cheaper instance because it's not, you don't need that expensive class there. So storage is a big one as well. Networking is trickier because there's a lot of different type of network transfer within AWS, right? There's external transfer, there's internal transfer, there's between zone and such. So network's a bit harder compared to storage and instance classes.
Yeah. One thing. Oh gosh, did that thought just go? I just had a really good thought. The production and non-production. I think this is one of the first things that you taught me when we were at Weather Channel, is making sure that teams were separating out. I mean, we did it by different accounts, but if you do it by different accounts, one of the nice things is that you can like test out some of these more restrictive policies that maybe terminate things, right? Versus warning you on Slack or email, because it's not production. And it also, they know that when this is labeled non-production, not to kind of go around the rules and really put production resources in it. And looking at those ratios, right, of like what is your production environment costing you versus what is your non-production environment costing you.
Yeah, and ideally, again, there's lots of factors that can make it not work, but ideally, you're able to spot trends in your non-production accounts before they even make it to production, right? Again, if you're working on a project that's kind of a multi-month project, making changes to your application, putting out a new version, whatever the case is, like if you see that your trends in non-production are going up, that could be an indication that something has changed in your configuration, has changed in your application that's making it cost more money. And then hopefully you can catch that and recognize that before it actually makes it production, where that change is probably going to be more significant and more impactful than it would be in a test environment.
Yeah, a little harder to change. Well, we're on about 1 minute left. I know I threw in your Twitter if people want to follow you. Is there any last minute points you want to throw in there?
Yeah, I'll say, I mentioned a few of these things are challenging, or not challenging, but are a bit complicated and take some time. But there's generally lots of low hanging fruit available, right? Like just writing a simple, Bash script or Python script, whatever the case might be, to just find instances that are not tagged is actually pretty easy. And then turn that into an email, turn that into a report that you can share with the team. That's kind of the most basic thing that you can get started with if you don't have any of these things in place. And then you can iterate that on that over time to improve over time. So don't take anything that we talked about as discouragement to not go try things and put something in place. You can start small and then improve on that over time.
Yep, I agree. And I'm throwing in our LinkedIn's in the chat, and tune in next week. We're going to be talking about AWS Billing Conductor, and Steph will be back and ready to go. So thank you everyone who tuned in today, and thank you Cameron for joining us bright and early in Seattle.
Thanks
Hope
for having
everyone
me.
has a good rest of your Thursday.